Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can get started with the slides here. Just 1 second. So we are super excited today to have Stefano Galeasso joining us from Energy Capital Ventures to talk a little bit about digital transformation in the energy industry and some of the things he sees going forward. And for those who haven't joined us in the FERC Professionals Group before, we are a group based mostly on LinkedIn, and then in these monthly meetings that meets to discuss issues facing filers, especially as we go into this XBRL transformations digital data set for FERC reporting. So we do these meetings monthly, and we're glad that everyone's been able to join us this month. And here's just a quick summary of what we're going to do today. So like I said, we have Stefano here to discuss the future of energy finance. We'll be able to ask him some questions. And then at the end, we're really excited to have our product engineer, Luke, to tour some of the new data released by the FERC in the recent, what we call the decade drops. Okay, Stefano, are you ready to go through your slides?
Anytime. Can you hear me well?
Yep.
We sure can.
Awesome. Hi, Adson. Hi, Virginia. Hi, Justin, everyone. And Yuval, it's great. It's great to be here. I really appreciate being here. So today, what I love to do is just go over, just for a minute, telling you, who I am and who we are at ECV, and then cover just a little bit. I don't know exactly that we know what's the future of transformation, but at least some of the things that we're seeing that are kind of coming online and are very, very, very interesting. There's definitely, data availability, and the ability to analyze that data is changing every day, and it's making new possibilities that just very few years ago, like 2-3 years ago, were really not possible. We just have such a different ability to generate data from real things in the real world, and a different ability to analyze that data through machine learning and just software libraries that have been developed in many industries and can be reused and tailored for a particular application. That it's just fantastic. So very exciting times. Maybe we'll go to next. I'll fly over just a quick introduction. We are ECV. We're a fund with a very unique angle. We're focused on the decarbonization and digital transformation of the natural gas industry. We're kind of the black sheep, in a sense, of clean energy, because people are trying to get away from molecules and from fossil fuels. And we also want to do that, but we want to do it with the people that have fossil fuels and have an actual opportunity to replace those molecules with molecules that don't carry that carbon burden, whether it's hydrogen, renewable natural gas, or other things. Maybe next slide. Some of the things that we're looking at, the top bucket. Think about anything that can, again, replace those molecules from fossil-based molecules with renewable sources or other sources like hydrogen that, again, don't carry that, the C word in them, or ways to utilize that carbon, right, and make something like a biofuel or a biochemical out of it. And on the bottom side, something, the digital transformation. So, utilities, the world that we're in, are not known to be at the very forefront of adoption of new technologies. And there's a lot of opportunities both to work on the core operations of the utility, to use data and software to improve operations. There's also a lot of options in a lot of different kind of auxiliary services, whether it's financial services or insurance or O&M, or pretty much anywhere around, to again use data and make improvements to the way that utilities are doing business. AR, for example, for field technicians, a lot of very interesting things. So going next slide. What we wanted to cover, these are just some very, very quick samples of a lot of interesting companies that we've seen. And the first one that I'd like to kind of focus on is that picture on the middle right. That's a tanker. And half of that picture is an oil tanker that is the real thing, and the other half is the digital twin of the real thing. So this is one of the ways that data is kind of coming and making a big difference in the way that we're seeing, in a sense, real world. So what this company does, they're actually recreating a very high fidelity digital replica of the real asset, overlaying sensor data that is coming from the vessel. And this sensor data has a long history, for years of usage. And now they have a complete real-time model of how this vessel is being used, operated, the kind of cycles that it's going through. So different pressure vessels inside the actual vessel. So the vessel meaning the boat. Are being stressed in different ways, and now what they can do, they can actually pinpoint, O&M, so the operation on the field crew, to do inspections in particular locations that are particularly stressed and they could be prone to failure. They can actually predict failure before it happens, and in doing so, they are reducing or eliminating unwanted or unplanned downtime. And particularly, this is a very heavy piece of capital-intensive machinery. They can really extend the life of that asset beyond what it was originally designed for by using real, actual data on how the system was utilized to tell whether this is something that can, continue to live on for a couple more years or it needs to be retired. Very interesting. There's some financial implications for sure in keeping and maintaining these systems, not perhaps pure financial services related, but very interesting applications. Another application that is also very interesting is the use of satellite data. I couldn't find an interesting enough picture for that, but satellite data just a few years ago, you couldn't really think of accessing as a civilian, really data for use in commercial applications, but nowadays it's used for a lot of different things. We can really see, for example, vegetation management. When you're looking at rights of ways where utilities have their lines, we can now see if trees are growing too close to the power lines, and we can prevent outages by sending somebody like a field crew to take care of that of those branches before they hit the wires during a storm. We can use to track LNG tankers, to track oil and gas, oil tankers. We can use it to track oil reserves on land. And then we can use the information and offer it to traders to give a real-time picture of how much oil we feel that we have in inventory, and what should the price be based on predicting forecasted demand, and this information can really influence the price of futures and other financial instruments used by traders. Again, interesting applications. Kairos is doing that, and other companies are doing that. On the bottom left, that crazy primordial chamber of life. Biology is now seeing data. We now have computational biology, and that means we can predict how modifying the DNA of a of a microbe or a bacteria is going to influence the behavior of that microbe or bacteria. And we can then use or optimize those microbes to take carbon and consume it and do something useful with it. And that's a way of using data that it's really new and really, really super cool. And hopefully it's going to really make a real impact on the way that we are, on the way that we live our daily lives by consuming that CO2 that we keep putting out in everything we do, basically, and do something useful with it. Something that is also very interesting. It's a company called Validator that is doing this. Is we can use data to track the quality of the molecules from the point of generation and all the way to the point of consumption. And so that means that we can look at a refinery. We can look at all the operational and sensor inputs, and we can see what is really the chemical composition of that barrel or that specific quantity. Usually it changes many hands before it gets to the point of use. So we can use that to help settle transactions at the end of all these different exchanges of molecules, exchanges of hands of molecules. But we can also use it to track the carbon intensity of those molecules. And now that means that we can have a differentiated fuel, and we can send a signal to the market that we are willing to pay a premium for molecules that have a lesser carbon intensity. And in doing so, we're incentivizing everybody to work towards collecting more data and prove that also their natural gas, oil, or whichever commodity coming from natural resources has a lower carbon intensity or has been mined or extracted in the best possible way. There's a theme that we're seeing in each one of these sectors, and it always starts out with data availability, whether it's sensor or whether it's a regulation change. This makes the data available. After you have data available, you can start to analyze that data. And the data analysis, the first layer is, can we visualize it? Can we benchmark it? Can we do something that is going to help us make sense of that data? There's a term that it's now not used anymore, but just a few years ago, it was super important, and that was data mining. And I like that analogy a lot. So you would, think about data as ore, and the mineral of interest is possibly diluted in that ore, and you have to treat it and dissect it and do something so that you can extract meaning out of that data. And that's definitely something that is very important, drives a lot of value. But even more important than the next phase is now data has predictive power. And when data becomes predictive, you can actually use it to influence outcomes. So now that I'm predicting that there's a failure, or I'm predicting that a rate case is having a particular impact on the way that maybe the capital structure even of a utility or whatever is possible, now I can change my actions today to obtain a different outcome tomorrow, which is something very, very powerful. And something we're seeing in HData is something very similar and very interesting. You now have a new, the availability of a new data set. The first thing you want to do with a data set is, grab it and use it and look at it and start to dissect it and start to extract meaning and value of that giant cauldron of data. And the next level is really, can you use it for predictive applications, and can you start to through benchmarking, and can you start through having executives and others that have decision-making power looking at the data, think about how to influence the future of a company, whether it's a utility or oil and gas, to really obtain a desired outcome. So every time the data becomes available, it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to do something more interesting, more valuable. And those are all things that we find extremely exciting. There's many more things, but I don't want to spend too much time on a lot of different examples. And so we can go over to the next. So just wrapping up, we're here. We love to help the industry. We love to support the innovation of the industry. If in any possible way we can help out, either with capital or with some of our connections, please reach out. We're always happy to help. And next slide. This is who we are, and the person with the best haircut is that picture. So it's been a pleasure, and yeah, I don't know if you want to have Q&A or anything, but otherwise I'll give it back to you, Virginia.
Yeah. So we should definitely open it up to questions if anyone has any.
Yes, indeed. I've got a question. Stefano, thank you so much for being our guest this afternoon. I'm curious if you could tell our audience a little bit more about your vision for the future for fewer carbon molecule-based energy operations. Obviously, the investments that you make are mostly oriented around the natural gas industry. Could you paint a picture of what that industry is going to look like? Maybe just incrementally. We all think about the longer term future of being carbon neutral or carbon negative even. But can you identify maybe a couple of the most prominent investments that Energy Capital Ventures has made that might have an incremental impact just in the next 5? Just to help us wrap our minds around how an incremental impact can lead to that future that we know is much more difficult.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think the answer is there's a portfolio of things that one can think about, right? The first step is when you think about consumption, you need to reduce consumption so that you can reduce the amount of energy that is needed to achieve a certain end use. Natural gas is mostly used for space heating and water heating applications in residential end uses, and there's a lot of commercial industrial end uses where it's very difficult to replicate, especially in industrial uses. But the first thing is looking at what technology is available today and what are some technologies that either are becoming available or the market is starting to request, in a sense, that can reduce the top line consumption over time. Something that we're looking at very actively are, for example, gas heat pumps or thermal heat pumps that have an opportunity to reduce the consumption for space and water heating applications by 30 to 50%. And incrementally, it's quite a jump, but you need to apply these to 100 and change. I forgot how many exactly, but like 110 or 120 million homes before you are really impacting giving a big nosedive to the overall sector consumption. So that's one area. We don't have an investment in that space. We've made only one investment because we're a new fund. We launched this summer. Our investment is in carbon utilization, and that's Semvita. It's an example. Hopefully, within 5 years, we'll see real results. And they're taking CO2 out of an exhaust, and they're actually consuming it. So these are the microbes that are consuming it and transforming that CO2 into biofuels and biochemicals. So when you're using it for biofuels, you can even think about a closed loop system. It's not 100% closed loop, but the conversion rate can be very high, like 95%. And that means that you have methane, so CH4 goes in, you now convert that to CO2 and H2O, so water and CO2 through combustion. You take that CO2, pump it into a big pressure vessel, and 95% of that CO2 can be converted back to CH4 by adding water and light and a sprinkle of magic, which is, it's phenomenal. But microbes do these every day, right? And plants do these at a much slower pace, but plants do these through photosynthesis. So this is really a way to replicate artificial photosynthesis to use it for what we need. And you could then take that CH4, pump it back from the beginning, pretty much where it came from, and burn it again, and do it again, again. So now the CO2 doesn't escape in the atmosphere. Other ways that we're seeing in the long term, hydrogen. Hydrogen has been talked about for many years, right? And so hydrogen can be blended in natural gas. and up to certain concentrations, like 15, 20% concentration, there's no changes needed pretty much to any of the system. And obviously hydrogen burns by making water. So there's no CO2 in there. To get to higher levels of concentration, we would need to make some upgrades to the system because hydrogen is a very small molecule and tends to escape. So we need to do some upgrades both in the system and also in the burners, but those are all technologically solvable. And the other thing that one can do is think about renewable sources of natural gas. So currently we're using fossil-based sources, right? And there's a finite quantity of those, and we're extracting them from geological formations, basically, and we're taking them out in the world at a pace that is faster than what we can kind of bring it back. Life processes, right, the decomposition of organic matter. So when we eat a banana and we toss the peel, that thing actually is going to decompose and create biomethane. And right now, most of it in landfills just goes back to the atmosphere. So there's a lot of projects. You can see there's a website called rngcoalition.org, maybe, or com. You can see that the number of projects that are looking at renewable natural gas is doubled in the last few years. And so we're really trying to take as much of these decomposing biological matter that we're creating. And this is us, going to the bathroom. That's those biosolids. Actually, they contain still a lot of energy, and they will be decomposed in methane as well. Manure, agricultural facilities, landfills, all of those. And by some estimates, 15 and 20% of all the natural gas that we consume today could actually come from those sources and could be economically harvested. So that's another way that, today you're really seeing we're still below 1% penetration. So the amount of RNG is still relatively low. But with some luck, in the next few years, we'll see a lot more of that. That was a very long-winded answer.
I actually have a follow-up to that, but I want to pause on the thought about the industry impact of some of these technologies, but I want to pause on the follow-up and see if I don't want to monopolize. Because we brought you here, Stefano, to talk to some of our audience, people that work on profiling, who are here with us in this call. So I want to open it up for others' questions. And before we finish with the questions, I do want to ask you about the natural gas industry. Or if there's silence, I'll ask it right now, but I am going to allow for
Yeah, I have a question to ask, but I wanted to make sure anyone else could ask a question. It's if no one else has anything, then I do have a question about early on in your presentation, you mentioned how utilities aren't really big in the R&D space. And, there are some pretty famous flops of times when they were trying to be, and it turned out to be not great for shareholders, not great for customers. I won't name any names at this point, but who do you think are the best players? Well, first question, should utilities be incentivized to be in the R&D space to improve energy delivery, generation, transmission? That's the first question. Should they be in the R&D space? And second, if not, who are the best people or organizations positioned to be the people pushing the envelope on innovation on how to improve all of our energy systems?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, we have a biased view, so I will disclose that for sure. We definitely think that there's a lot of room to play in innovation for utilities. The way that we are delivering energy, whether it's electric or natural gas, has really not changed in the last 70, 80 years. I mean, it's still wires delivering electrons and pipes delivering molecules. I mean, in part, that's a good thing because the system works and it works reliably. It's very cost effective. It doesn't break the bank to heat up your home, doesn't break the bank to turn on lights, operate computers, cell phones, everything, right? So that's very interesting. The thing is, innovation is needed now because we have new priorities, right? For many, many years, we just didn't care about many things that are now becoming pretty evident and are starting to impact our lives. So now we need to think about what can we do to really make a dent in our impact. The first thing is always, can you find some good data and a good baseline that is measurable, it's actionable, and from there you can now say, this is my target, and this is an actionable, measurable target, and these are sets of technologies that we can use and we can do to get there, right? And we can track the deployment of those technologies. We can track the impact of those technologies. Right now, a lot is being talked about at COP26. Well, we don't know exactly what, but some of the things that it seems to be coming out is really methane emission, or fugitive methane emission controls, right? That's very interesting. I mean, for many years, forever actually, things were not really looked at that with a fine tooth comb. So basically, we didn't know how much methane was coming out, fugitive methane was coming out of flares, flanges, and all the system. We now do, or we have the opportunity to do that, right? We're just not using it. And so a regulation change, right? EPA's proposed rules. So with some luck, we'll see a final rule. I know that these things take usually twice as long with 10 times as many pages of comments and everything is needed. But like with some luck, we will then have the ability to really measure and improve upon what we're doing, right? And utilities are also doing some investment in R&D by pooling resources in things like EPRI and GTI, right, which are really GTI, Gas Technology Institute, and EPRI, the Electric Power Research Institute. And those they work. Utilities are franchises, so they have their territory, and I mean, they're not really competing, and so it makes sense to pool resources and look for innovation. And that's exactly what we're doing at ECV. We're pooling resources of multiple utilities, and we're looking at companies that are market ready and that we can bring to them. Again, if one picks up a technology, it's not competing with somebody else. So it's actually a great way to do innovation and to reduce the risk.
Very good. I've got my follow-up. Any other questions from our audience for Stefano for Energy Capital Ventures? All right, I got a related question, but it's back to the natural gas industry, Stefano. You talk about the business model. It strikes me that, especially in the natural gas industry, the business model is selling gas. And I was struck by your example of the machinery that you're talking about that reduces the consumption of gas. Mm-hmm. How does the natural gas industry change its model if some of the innovations wind up in slower growth in gas sales or even reductions in gas sales, if that's the way that they got paid up until now?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question, right? So depending on the utility territory, already at least 50%, if not the majority of the cost, is really the maintenance and operations of the infrastructure and not of the commodity. So if you reduce that commodity, that's fine. I mean, you can think about a different price signal to the customer. You still need to be connected with a broader network. We've a few years ago, people were talking about the utility death spiral, right? We're going to put solar panels are reducing consumption, and everybody is going to self-produce electricity. And so the utilities are going to go out of business because their rates will go up and up and up and up. And that will make it more cost effective for people to actually do solar. But it didn't work out that way. You still need to be connected to the network because the reliability that the network brings, the ability of pooling resources and spreading costs among everybody, it is so important. You can definitely do solar. You can also put storage on energy storage and have now a relatively minimal draw from the grid, right? There's many customers in California and other sunny states, probably not as much in Chicago for the foreseeable future. We'll see how climate change changes that. You'll see that, and the utilities are very fine. They're selling less of the commodity, but are still being compensated for the reliability and the ability to, whenever you need it, to draw from the big pool. There are some challenges at the more competitive markets that are really being seen in. I mean, we've seen some markets, maybe they didn't fail fully, but they definitely had some failure points, and they've exposed some of the weaknesses in those market structures when you have a lot of that penetration and the reliability component is not compensated or is not valued in the right way, basically, without naming regions or FERC regulated or unregulated territories. But it's basically, even if natural gas, actually most of the folks that we're talking to are really modeling in their future less commodity and less organic growth, and that's fine. That's part of design, and maintaining access to those molecules and doing the best possible use we can of those molecules is really becoming the priority.
Very good. I'm sure some of these predictions will come true, and it's really valuable to us and to our audience, Stefano, for you to be sharing them with us. There's nobody better situated to see the future of the finance of the energy industry and the future of the industry writ large. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's been a pleasure. Yeah, looking forward to see the decade drop.
Okay. Well, I'm going to give control back. Luke, do you want to take it away?
Sure thing.
As Luke's pulling up his screen, for those of you who have somehow escaped seeing our obsessive broadcast emails over the last 2 months, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission didn't just switch away from PDF into the new XBRL format for annual and quarterly reports going forward. The FERC also went retroactive. That means the agency decided to go back 10 years, migrate thousands of annual and quarterly forms into the new XBRL format, and drop that all at once. We call it the decade drop. It went public on September 17th, and 22 days ago, our tech team, including Luke, finished loading it into the FERC Pro Data Hub. So you are about to be among the first people in history to see a decade worth of information filed officially with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, arrayed in a way that makes it very easy to converse with and analyze. We're going to see the decade drop. Luke, take it away.
Yep, sure thing. So I think one of the best ways to look at this decade drop is actually through our visual analysis tool. This tool actually allows us to visualize by any company that is regulated by the FERC within any industry with any number that is stored within the FERC Form 1, 2, 6, 60, and their responding quarterlies. So I actually dive into, I have a few different search cards here, and the way we organize all these visualizations is on a search card basis. So I was actually playing around with a visualization looking at utility companies by operating revenue. So these are the top 10 companies within the United States by their operating revenue, and then we're comparing on several different benchmarks. What we're looking at right now is non-fuel operation and maintenance expense per dollar of revenue. As a part of that, we have Duke Energy Carolina as one of the primary companies, and we're benchmarking Duke Energy based on the peer group of the other 9 companies among that 10 largest companies in the country. So you can actually see the full 10 years of data going back all the way to 2010 to 2020. And this, we will be getting new data on a rolling basis as the new filings come in. So we'll have data going to 2021, 22, all the quarterlies. As a part of this, we've noticed a lot of interesting trends with this decade drop. So I'll actually use an example of operating revenues. We have operating expenses as well. And then we can switch between all the different companies within this list. So we'll actually see here that Pacific Gas and Electric Company, major spike in operating expenses in 2018 and 2019. And that's actually because that was from all the wildfires within California. So a lot of the wildfires had destroyed some of the transmission infrastructure that they managed, and they had to replace that infrastructure going forward. That's why we saw large spikes in 2018 and 2019. As a part of that, given that a lot of companies will have large operating revenues, but companies will be different in operating revenue size. So that's why we have a lot of the key performance indicators like non-fuel O&M per dollar revenue. But going into that, if we want to look at other KPIs, if we want to look at, let's take an example of AMG per dollar revenue. We can add that into the list. Go ahead and refresh the card here. Now we can compare it on a different key performance indicator. Again, administrative and general expenses were pretty high, at least for Duke Energy in 2018 and 2019, but we can switch it out and then see how this might change between the companies within this list. So now that we have this 10 years of data, it provides a lot more flexibility in what we can show. We can show a lot of trends that can potentially help inform us on what we can see going into the future. One other thing that I've noticed just playing around with the data is we have seen quite a bit of a drop in operating revenue amongst the entire industry due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So when we're looking at operating revenues for the entire oil industry, for example, we saw a 6.4% decline in operating revenues for all companies regulated by the FERC. But we did not see a similar decline in electric and natural gas. While those industries did decline, they did not decline as much as oil. It was less than 1%. I believe I actually have a search card for that. I might have deleted it. That's okay. I'll kind of open up to if anyone has any questions on the previous 10 years of data. As you can see, I was looking at utility companies. We can look at the same thing for oil companies. So we're looking at the 10 largest oil companies by operating revenues. And just looking at the 2019 to 2020 data, Enbridge, of course, operating revenues declined. Most of operating revenue declined except for a few standout companies like Loans. So you had Lone Star here, as well as Sunoco, and then you had Enbridge Pipelines. But overall, we've seen a pretty distinct trend of declining operating revenue between 2019 and 2020. But looking at the grand scheme of things, even with that decline, that's not as big of a decline that we may have seen in previous years. So any questions on what I've shown you so far?
I'm sure folks have some questions, but I will again jump in over the dead air time. Luke, I've got two questions. First, what do you think is the most surprising thing you've seen in the data? You're the closest person to it in looking at 10 years worth of the thousands of different numbers that have been reported over that time to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. What has been contrary to your expectations? And the second question is, you talked about the impact of the COVID pandemic. How have you seen energy finance? How has the impact differed across electric, oil, and gas? So first, surprises, and second, different kinds of energy industries reacting differently in their finance.
Yeah, I think one of the most surprising things, I think one of the big ones was that kind of PG&E spike when I showed you a little bit earlier. When we actually talked with some representative of PG&E, they noted like, oh yeah, that's because of this happening. So it was really cool to be able to see that, like, if you saw this in a trend analysis, what would be an abnormality actually has a reason behind it. So what we can show here is kind of that quantitative aspect of, hey, this looks a little funky, why is it the way it is? And then actually getting the reason behind it is just a really cool thing. It's almost like you discovered the key to, new knowledge of like, wow, this is cool that we were able to visualize it this way, but then also kind of bring in that qualitative background, because we were asking those questions of, this is really cool, but what happened? And that's kind of what we want this platform to help drive for a lot of people is, wow, this is an interesting number. What happened? Why is this number the way it is? So I think that's one of the big things that was most surprising. Again, when I was doing the COVID analysis too, I think just a massive drop for oil in comparison to natural gas and electric, which kind of goes to your second question, is when we saw operating revenues decline for oil, I actually did a lot of background research within the Energy Information Administration, and they saw a massive decline in just daily consumption of oil. I think in the United States, daily consumption declined by 2.7 million barrels. So right off the bat, that would immediately impact operating revenue. Just consumption is down, but it was down across the board, across the entire world. So it was very reflective of the pandemic being a global thing. But even so, electric was not impacted. Yeah, we had a decline in electric consumption as the EIA was showing, but it didn't impact operating revenue as much as I thought it would. Because even though you had people staying at home, they're still consuming electricity at home, even though they may not be using their car as much anymore, or companies are cutting essential travel. So it makes a lot of sense why we might not see as big of a decline in operating revenues for electric or even natural gas for heating homes than we would see for oil, because people are not flying or driving as much, or even public transportation. A lot of public transportation would decline as well.
Yeah, makes sense. One of the earlier charts you put up there that showed a 10-year view of non-fuel O&M, or really whatever metric you wanted to look at, that did a comparison against the peer group. I could imagine that falling into the hands of a regulator, or being placed, should I say, into the hands of a regulator. And that, especially if you can choose your peer group, depending on your utility, making a very compelling case for or against why they should let you do certain or make certain investments and approve certain things. Like, just having this availability of data is fantastic for peer analysis and really driving home the point about why your utility has some compelling case, and why continuing to invest in some manner is good for customers. It's also good for investors. Everyone wins. Like, just this level of insight, it's fantastic. Like, I could see this being very useful for a regulator to size up a company's cost structure, how they're performing against peers.
Mm-hmm.
This is awesome.
And one thing else I'll also note is this took me about 10 minutes to compile. So it's pretty quick, where if we're looking at some of the old stuff where people would actually have to download the PDFs, copy and paste this information into an Excel file, and then run a visualization either in Excel or through your own BI software like Tableau or Microsoft BI. Everything's in-house here, so I can just take in the data and quickly make a visualization, and I don't have to do any downloading. I don't have to pull any PDFs. It's just entirely contained within this tool, which I found very, very helpful when I wanted to create something like this.
Okay, does anyone else have any questions regarding that decade drop, even still for Stefano, if he thought of something later on? Okay, well, thanks everyone for joining today. This was a great session. Like I said, we'll have this up in the FERC Professionals Group on LinkedIn shortly after this finishes. Yeah, thanks to Stefano for joining us today.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.